The silence of deep space was shattered by a desperate distress signal. Captain Ryan Cole sat in the cockpit of his worn-out starship, staring at the flickering red indicator on his console. Distress signals were common in war zones, often traps or lost causes. He should ignore it. Keep flying. Stay out of trouble. But something in the tone of the repeating message caught his attention, a language he barely recognized, layered with urgency and fear. His fingers hovered over the controls. He had survived by making smart choices, and helping strangers wasn't one of them. But he sighed, adjusting his course toward the signal. Minutes later, Ryan's ship dropped out of hyperspace above a dying planet. Fires raged in the distance, and the ruins of a battlefield stretched for miles. Wreckage from a recent fight littered the surface. Burnt-out husks of ships, smoldering structures, and twisted metal. The signal pulsed from a single, half-destroyed shuttle lying on its side. Ryan landed nearby, stepping onto the cracked ground with his pulse rifle ready. His boots crunched against debris as he approached the wreckage. Smoke and sparks poured from its ruptured hull. The distress beacon was still blinking. A faint noise echoed from within, ragged breathing, movement. He peered inside and froze. Huddled in the shadows was an alien woman, her dark violet skin smeared with blood and dirt. Her eyes, a deep silver, were wide with pain and exhaustion. In her arms, a small child clung to her, trembling. The girl, barely 5 or 6 in human years, buried her face in her mother's chest, terrified. The woman's gaze locked onto Ryan, her body tensing. She tried to move but winced in pain, clutching her side. A deep gash ran along her ribs, blood seeping through her torn clothing. Ryan recognized the look in her eyes. Fear, not just from her injury, but from him. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, keeping his voice calm. "I picked up your distress signal. Can you walk?" The woman didn't answer, but her grip tightened on the child. The girl peeked at him with wide, frightened eyes. Then the noise hit, a distant roar. Ryan turned sharply, eyes scanning the horizon. Over the hill, movement, figures in black armor, moving fast. Their weapons gleamed under the smoky sky. Damn it, he knew that armor. Hunters. The worst kind. He had seen them before. Mercenaries hired by powerful empires to wipe out the last of dying species. If they were here, that meant one thing. These two weren't just random survivors. Ryan cursed under his breath. The woman saw them too. Her breathing turned shallow. The child whimpered, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. There was no time. Ryan lunged forward, grabbed the woman under one arm, and lifted her with ease. She gasped, struggling weakly, but she was too weak to resist. The child yelped in panic as he hoisted her too, securing her in his grip. "They're coming. If you want to live, hold on." The woman stiffened, hesitating for just a second, then wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her close. Ryan ran. Blaster fire cracked through the air as the hunters spotted them. Blue streaks of plasma hissed past, scorching the ground inches from his boots. Ryan zigzagged, dodging as much as he could. His ship was close, but not close enough. A shot grazed his shoulder. Pain burned through his jacket, but he didn't stop. The ramp of his ship lowered automatically as he approached. He leaped onto it, nearly collapsing inside as the doors sealed shut behind him. Alarms blared. Target locks. Missile warnings. Ryan threw himself into the pilot's seat, fingers flying over the controls. The engines roared, and his ship lifted off just as a missile streaked toward them. The explosion shook the entire hull. Systems flickered. The girl screamed. "Hold together, damn it," Ryan muttered. The hunters' ships were already taking off, coming after them. He gritted his teeth, pushing the thrusters to their limit. The ship lurched violently, the force pressing them back into their seats. Ryan yanked the controls, dodging incoming fire as his screen blared warnings. A fighter locked onto them. A missile warning screamed through the cockpit. Ryan punched the hyperspace drive. With a deafening boom, The ship vanished into the void, leaving the burning planet behind. For a long moment, silence filled the cabin. Ryan's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. He turned in his seat, glancing at the two passengers now crumpled in the corner. The child clung to her mother, small hands gripping tight, her eyes still wet with fear. The woman met his gaze, her silver eyes filled with something new. Not just fear, something else. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was relief. Or maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see him as something more than a stranger. Something closer to a protector. And Ryan had no idea what he had just gotten himself into. The ship hurtled through hyperspace, leaving the burning planet and the pursuing hunters far behind. Inside the dimly lit cockpit, the only sound was the steady hum of the engines and the faint, uneven breathing of the alien mother and her child. Ryan kept one hand on the controls, his other pressed against his injured shoulder. The burn from the blaster graze stung, but it wasn't deep. He had dealt with worse. He turned his head slightly, watching the two figures huddled against the far wall. The woman was still cradling the child, her body tense, her silver eyes flickering with caution. The girl clung to her mother, tiny fingers curled tightly into her torn clothing. She had barely moved since they escaped, her small frame trembling from shock. Ryan exhaled and leaned back in his seat. "You okay?" he asked, his voice steady but rough from the adrenaline still pumping through his system. The woman flinched slightly at his voice, as if expecting a threat. When she didn't respond, Ryan let out a slow breath. He wasn't expecting gratitude, but some acknowledgement would have been nice. He had just saved their lives, after all. Still, he understood. Fear didn't just disappear because someone saved you. "Your name." He tried again, keeping his tone calm. The woman studied him for a long moment. She was still trying to figure him out, who he was, what he wanted, and whether she had just jumped from one danger to another. Finally, her lips parted, and her voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Zyra." Ryan nodded, his gaze shifting to the girl, who still wouldn't look at him. "And her." The woman hesitated again. Protective. She stroked the girl's hair softly, her fingers gentle despite her own exhaustion. "Laika." Ryan nodded again, filing the names away. "I'm Ryan." Silence stretched between them, the weight of the situation pressing in on all sides. He turned his attention back to the controls, checking their flight path. They were safe, for now, but not for long. Those hunters weren't the type to give up easily. He had seen that armor before, recognized the insignia on their helmets. The Korthan Empire's death squads. Ryan clenched his jaw. That explained a lot. The Korthans didn't just kill their enemies. They wiped out entire bloodlines, erased species from existence. If they were after Zyra and Laika, it meant one thing. They were the last of something important. And now he was tangled up in it. Ryan sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. He should have ignored that damn distress signal. It would have been easier, simpler. But he had never been good at walking away from people who needed help. The girl stirred slightly, shifting against her mother's side. Her large, silver eyes flicked up toward him for just a second before darting away again. Ryan frowned. She hurt. Zyra tightened her grip on Laika. No, she was lying. Ryan had seen enough refugees, enough war survivors, to recognize the way a child shakes when they haven't eaten in days. He pushed up from his seat, ignoring the sting in his shoulder. Zyra tensed immediately, her muscles coiling as if expecting him to lash out. Ryan simply walked to a storage compartment, rummaged inside, and pulled out a ration pack. He knelt and placed it on the floor between them, then backed away. "Not the best meal, but it's food," he said. Zyra didn't move, her silver eyes locked on him, studying, analyzing. Laika, however, sniffed the air. A long pause stretched out before the child hesitantly reached forward, her tiny fingers curling around the packet. She tugged it toward her chest and looked up at her mother for permission. Zyra still hesitated, but finally, She gave a small nod. Ryan returned to his seat and watched as the little girl tore into the food like a starving animal, her small hands shaking. She had been hungry for a long time. Ryan stared at the control panel, jaw tightening. He hated seeing kids like that. It never got easier. The navigation screen beeped, pulling him back to reality. Their coordinates were approaching a neutral trade station on the outer rim, a place to lay low, make repairs, and figure out their next move. But as he reached for the controls, the ship shuddered violently. Ryan's instincts flared. He straightened immediately, hands flying over the dashboard. The hyperspace drive was still engaged, but something was wrong. Another violent lurch threw Zura and Laika against the wall. The warning lights on the console flashed red. They were being pulled out of hyperspace. Shit, Ryan muttered, his fingers racing over the controls. Zura clutched Laika tightly, her voice sharp. What's happening? Ryan barely had time to answer before the ship snapped back into normal space, jolting them forward. The moment the stars reappeared around them, Ryan's stomach dropped. A massive Korthan warship loomed ahead, its dark hull cutting through the void like a predator. They had been tracked. Ryan didn't hesitate. He punched the thrusters, but his console flashed with an energy lockdown warning. A tractor beam had already latched onto them. Hold on, he shouted as he slammed the emergency override, diverting power to the engines. The ship groaned under the strain, trying to break free from the invisible grip, but the warship was too powerful. Laika let out a frightened whimper, burying her face in Zura's chest. Ryan's mind raced. He was outmatched, outgunned, and trapped. The Korthans weren't here to negotiate. They would kill him, take Zyra and Laika, and wipe their existence from history. He had one chance. Ryan grabbed his pulse rifle from the wall and tossed a second weapon toward Zyra. She caught it with a sharp, practiced movement. "You know how to use it?" he asked, already knowing the answer. She checked the charge, her silver eyes hardening. Yes. Ryan gave a grim nod. Then the warship's docking clamps locked on, and the ship shuddered as the airlock was forcibly connected. Heavy footsteps thumped against the hull. They were coming. Ryan took a deep breath, leveling his weapon at the sealed airlock door. The moment it opened, hell was going to break loose. And this time, he wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for theirs. The ship trembled as the docking clamps locked in place. A deep metallic clang echoed through the hull, sealing Ryan's fate. The Korthans were here. Ryan gripped his pulse rifle tighter, his knuckles turning white. His mind raced, calculating the odds, the exits, the possible ways to survive. None of them looked good. His ship was a sturdy old thing, but against a Korthan warship, it was nothing more than a tin can in a storm. Behind him, Zyra positioned herself near the cockpit's entrance, keeping Laika tucked behind a storage crate. She held the weapon Ryan had tossed her injured body trembling slightly, but her silver eyes were sharp, focused. She had fought before. That much was clear. Laika, on the other hand, was frozen in fear. Her small body curled inward, her hands gripping the fabric of her mother's clothing like a lifeline. Her breathing was shallow, her silver eyes darting between Ryan and the sealed airlock door. A heavy thud echoed through the corridor, then another. Ryan exhaled slowly, raising his weapon toward the door. "They'll try to gas us first," he muttered. Standard Korthan boarding tactic. Flush out resistance before storming in. Zyra didn't reply, but she shifted slightly, angling her weapon toward the vents. She knew what to expect. She had seen this before. Ryan adjusted his stance. He only had seconds. A loud hiss filled the ship as the air vents blasted open. A thick, greenish fog rushed into the cabin, swirling like a living thing. Zyra immediately pulled Laika's face into her chest, shielding the child from the gas. Ryan yanked a small breathing filter from his belt and clipped it over his nose and mouth. The gas was disorienting, designed to make its victims dizzy, weak, compliant. Ryan felt the sting in his eyes, the burn in his throat, but he had trained for this. He forced himself to stay focused. The airlock hissed open. A Korthan soldier stepped through, his massive frame encased in black armor, his helmet hiding his features. A sleek plasma rifle was aimed forward, scanning the gas-filled room. Another soldier followed, then a third. Ryan moved first. He fired. The pulse rifle roared, sending a shot straight into the first soldier's helmet. The impact ripped through the visor, sending him crashing backward. The second Korthan barely had time to react before Zira fired, her shot hitting center mass, making the enemy stagger before collapsing. The third soldier let out a guttural snarl and charged. Ryan barely sidestepped as the massive brute swung the shock baton, the crackling weapon missing his head by inches. Ryan spun, using the butt of his rifle to smash into the soldier's exposed ribs, then fired point-blank into his chest. The Korthan dropped like a stone. The gas still hung in the air, but Ryan knew more were coming. The Korthans never sent only 3. Zira coughed, struggling to stay upright. The gas was getting to her. Ryan grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the corridor. "We need to move. Now." She didn't argue. With Laika held tightly against her, she followed as Ryan rushed toward the engine bay. The ship shook violently. A deep mechanical groan rumbled through the hull. Ryan cursed under his breath. They weren't just boarding his ship. They were tearing it apart. A voice crackled through the overhead speakers, deep and filled with amused cruelty. "Human, you have something that belongs to us. Surrender the fugitives, and your death will be swift." Ryan ignored it, yanking open a maintenance panel. Inside, a set of emergency thruster overrides gleamed under dim blue lights. Zira narrowed her eyes. "What are you doing?" "Giving us an exit." Ryan pulled a power cable free, rerouting energy from the shields to the forward thrusters. If this worked, it would break the docking clamps and send them spiraling away from the warship. If it didn't work, well, they'd all die. A heavy boom shook the ship again. Ryan's heart pounded. The next wave of Korthans would storm in any second. Laika let out a soft whimper. Zira whispered something to her in their native tongue, her voice soothing but firm. Ryan didn't have time to ask what she said. The overhead lights flickered. The ship's AI sputtered warnings. The Korthans were trying to shut down his systems remotely. Ryan gritted his teeth, flipping the final switch. The thrusters roared to life. A massive explosion rocked the warship outside as Ryan's ship broke free from its docking clamps. The force sent them spiraling into open space, the stars twisting violently outside the viewport. Ryan gripped the controls, forcing the ship into a hard roll. The Korthan warship tried to reacquire its target, but Ryan dived toward the nearest asteroid belt, weaving between massive hunks of floating rock. Zira braced herself against the wall, still shielding Laika as the ship rocked violently. "They'll follow us." Ryan grinned. "Let them try." A warning siren blared. Enemy ships were in pursuit. Ryan's hands flew over the controls, adjusting thruster outputs, rerouting power to the rear shields. 2 sleek, black fighters broke off from the warship, their engines glowing bright against the void. Missiles locked on. Ryan's fingers hovered over the countermeasures. He could evade 1, maybe 2, but the moment they got a clean shot, it was over. Then his communications console lit up. An incoming transmission. Encrypted. Unknown origin. Ryan frowned, glancing at Zira. She looked just as confused. The signal pinged again. Then a voice crackled through the speakers, sharp and urgent. "Cole, you idiot, you're leading them straight to me. Do exactly what I say, or we're all dead in 60 seconds. Ryan's stomach dropped. He knew that voice. Jace, a hacker, a smuggler, and sometimes a backstabbing bastard. Ryan hadn't heard from him in years. And now, somehow, he was their only way out. Ryan hesitated, his fingers hovering over the controls. Jace, of all the people to show up now, it had to be him. The last time they had spoken, Jace had double-crossed him on a weapons deal and left him stranded on a freezing backwater moon with a gang of bounty hunters on his tail. Ryan had barely made it out alive. But right now, the two Korthan fighters were closing in fast, and if Jace had a way out of this mess, Ryan wasn't in a position to argue. He pressed a button, opening the comm channel. "I don't take orders from you, Jace." A scoff crackled through the speakers. "Then enjoy getting vaporized, dumbass." A pause. Then, "See that asteroid at your 2 o'clock. Adjust course now." Ryan's eyes flicked to the scanner. There was a dense cluster of debris from a shattered moon up ahead, a mess of jagged rock and floating wreckage. It wasn't an ideal escape route, but it was better than open space where the Korthans had a clear shot. Ryan gritted his teeth and yanked the controls hard, sending the ship into a sharp turn. The ship lurched violently, Zyra grabbing onto a side panel to keep herself from toppling over. "Trusting him is a mistake," she said, voice tight. Ryan didn't disagree, but they had no time to debate it. The Korthan fighters followed, weaving through the floating wreckage behind them. Ryan saw the first missile lock indicator blare red on his screen. "Jace, cut your engines now." Ryan hesitated. That was suicide. "Cold, do it." Ryan slammed the emergency thruster kill switch. The ship jerked hard, everything inside floating for a split second as they lost gravity. The sudden loss of momentum sent them drifting. The first Korthan fighter shot past them, its targeting system overcompensating. Jace's voice rang through the speakers again. "Now punch the left thrusters and drop 40 degrees. Now. Ryan reacted instantly, firing the left thrusters and sending the ship into a sharp spiral downward. The second Korthan fighter couldn't adjust in time. It swerved to avoid colliding with a massive asteroid, but instead slammed headfirst into a drifting wreckage, exploding into a ball of fire. One down. The first fighter looped back around, locking on again. "Jace, we're still sitting ducks here." A new blip appeared on the scanner. A ship, fast and sleek, ripped out of hyperspace right above them. Ryan barely had time to register it before it unleashed an electromagnetic pulse bomb. The burst of blue energy flashed outward, catching the Korthan fighter in its range. The ship's systems flickered, died, and it spiraled into the asteroid belt, crashing into a floating rock and exploding on impact. Ryan's ship, only barely outside the EMP blast range, shuddered but remained functional. The comm crackled again. "You're welcome." Ryan exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You better not be leading us into another one of your messes, Jace." "Oh, please," Jace said smugly. "I am the mess." Zyra tensed, eyes still sharp with suspicion. "Who is this?" Ryan sighed. "A pain in my ass." Jace's laugh came through the speakers. "Flattering, but no time for love letters. That Korthan warship won't sit pretty for long, and I just saved your sorry skins. Get your ass over here." A new set of coordinates appeared on Ryan's screen. A space station not far from their location, hidden within a dense nebula field. A perfect place to disappear. Ryan hesitated for just a second, then pushed the thrusters forward. They were running out of options. The station loomed ahead, barely visible against the swirling green and purple gases of the nebula. It was old, rusted, and barely holding together, the kind of place criminals and outlaws called home. As Ryan guided the ship into a docking bay, Zyra remained silent, her gaze unreadable. She didn't trust Jace, and honestly, neither did Ryan. When the ship settled, Ryan stood, checking his pulse rifle. "You two stay here," he told Zyra. "Jace and I have history. If this goes sideways, I don't want you caught in it." Zyra tilted her head. "If he's a risk, why come here at all?" Ryan exhaled. "Because right now, he's our best bad option." She held his gaze for a long moment before nodding. But as Ryan stepped toward the exit ramp, a small hand gripped his sleeve. He stopped, looked down. "Like a The little girl had barely made a sound the entire trip, but now she was holding on to him. Ryan swallowed. "It's okay, kid," he said, softer than before. "I'll be back." Her fingers slowly released him, but her silver eyes stayed locked on his. Ryan turned and walked down the ramp. Jace was waiting near a cluster of crates, leaning against a rusted railing with his usual cocky smirk. His dark jacket was patched in places, and his shaggy brown hair was messier than Ryan remembered. But his sharp eyes were just as quick, just as dangerous. "Dan Cole, you're looking rough." Ryan crossed his arms. "Cut the crap. Why did you help us?" Jace grinned. "Because you're in way over your head, and I love watching you squirm." Ryan didn't react, just stared. Jace sighed, rolling his eyes. "Fine, because you've just made a whole lot of powerful enemies." Ryan raised a brow. "You think I don't know that?" "You don't know why." Jace's smirk faded slightly. He crossed his arms. "That woman you're protecting, she's not just some random refugee." Ryan's stomach tightened. Jace leaned in slightly. "The Korthans don't waste resources chasing nobodies. Zura, she's the last royal heir of a dead empire." Ryan's breath stilled. Jace nodded. "Oh yeah, you just got yourself wrapped up in a galactic manhunt." Ryan exhaled sharply. "Great." Jace chuckled. "You always knew how to pick him." Ryan rubbed a hand down his face. If Jace was right, if Zura was some exiled royal, that meant the Korthans wouldn't stop hunting her, wouldn't stop hunting Laika. And now, because of him, they'd never stop hunting him either. Jace sighed. "Look, I can wipe your ship's signature, get you new transponder codes, maybe even find you a safe system to lay low." Ryan's jaw tightened. "What's the catch?" Jace smirked. "Oh, I'll think of something." Ryan didn't like that answer. But at this point, he didn't have much of a choice. Ryan didn't like Jace's smirk. He had seen it before, right before some double cross, some underhanded deal that left Ryan cleaning up the mess. But right now, with Korthan hunters breathing down his neck and a mother and child depending on him, he didn't have the luxury of walking away. He exhaled, crossing his arms. "Fine. You wipe my ship's signature, get me new transponder codes, and I'll owe you one." Jace chuckled. "Oh, you already owe me plenty, Cole." Ryan ignored that. "How long?" "Couple of hours, give or take." Jace turned toward a rusted terminal on the station's walkway, typing something in. "I've got a backroom set up. No questions, no records, but you need to keep a low profile." Ryan glanced around at the seedy space station, where smugglers, bounty hunters, and criminals moved like shadows in the dim lighting. A low profile was easier said than done. He turned back toward his ship. "I'm bringing Zyra and Laika with me." Jace raised a brow. "Risky move, but suit yourself." Ryan didn't care. He wasn't leaving them alone. Not here. Back inside the ship, Zyra had already armed herself, standing near the entrance with a cold, unreadable gaze. Laika stood half-hidden behind a crate, silent but watchful. She had barely spoken since they arrived. "We're going with him," Ryan said. Zyra's eyes narrowed slightly. "You trust him?" "No," Ryan said bluntly. "But we don't have better options." Laika's small fingers curled into her mother's sleeve, but Zyra only nodded. Without another word, she lifted Laika into her arms and followed Ryan down the ramp. The station was a maze of rusted corridors, flickering neon lights, and the smell of burning coolant. Ryan led them through the narrow walkways, keeping one hand near his holster at all times. Jace moved ahead, whistling like he didn't have a care in the world. "You always take the scenic route," Ryan muttered. Jace grinned over his shoulder. "Only when I have guests." Zyra wasn't impressed. She kept her grip firm on Laika, scanning every shadow, every passing figure. She had the look of someone who had lived too long running and fighting, never truly safe. Finally, Jace stopped in front of a reinforced door. A security scanner blinked red, and he pressed his palm against it. The door slid open, revealing a cramped room filled with tech, wires, and a holo console buzzing with encrypted data. Ryan stepped inside cautiously. "This where you do all your illegal magic?" Jace smirked, moving toward the console. "You wound me, Cole. This is all very legal. In some system, probably." Ryan rolled his eyes. Jace cracked his knuckles and started typing, bringing up Ryan's ship ID, transponder codes, and flight logs. He worked fast, fingers flying over the controls, wiping records, scrambling signals, erasing their trail. "You weren't kidding," Jace muttered. "The Korthans put out a high-priority bounty on you. They don't just want Zira. They want you too." Ryan clenched his jaw. "Yeah, I figured. Whatever she did, they really, really want her dead." Jace flicked a glance at Zira. "What's your story, princess?" Zira's expression didn't change, but Ryan could tell she was measuring Jace, calculating, deciding if he was worth answering. Finally, she spoke. "My people fought the Korthans for generations. We lost. My daughter and I are all that remain." Jace let out a low whistle. "Damn." He turned back to his console. "Well, you've definitely got the Korthans pissed." Ryan already knew that, but something about Jace's tone made his gut twist. "What else?" Ryan asked. Jace hesitated. Then, without looking up, he said, "You've got another problem." Ryan's stomach tightened. "What kind of problem?" Jace tapped a few keys, and a holo-display flickered to life, showing a bounty notice with Ryan's face on it. "Someone else wants you dead, Cole." Ryan leaned in, reading the details. It wasn't Korthan issued. This was private. A bounty placed by an unknown source, but the price was high. Too high. Zira frowned. Who ruled? A sudden blast shook the station. Ryan's instincts flared. He spun toward the door, hand on his weapon. Jace cursed, fingers flying over the console. Shit, someone just breached the docking bay. Ryan didn't need to ask who. The Korthans had found them. Alarms blared through the station, sending people into chaos. Ryan rushed toward the door, Zira and Laika close behind. Jace called out, "Cole, your ship's still locked in the system. You won't get out without my override." Ryan gritted his teeth. "Then do it fast." Jace swore under his breath and kept working. Ryan peeked around the corner, his pulse rifle raised. The station's mercenaries were already engaging the intruders, gunfire echoing through the corridors. He saw them, black-armored Korthan enforcers pushing through the crowd, firing with precision. They weren't here for anyone else. They were here for Zira and Laika. Ryan turned back to Zira. "Stay behind me." She didn't argue. He took aim, fired the first shot. A blast of blue energy ripped through a Korthan's chest, sending him crashing to the ground. The others immediately turned toward them, weapons raised. Ryan ducked behind cover, Zira firing alongside him. Her aim was precise, taking down another Korthan with a single shot. Laika squeezed her eyes shut, pressing herself against her mother. Jace yelled from inside, "I'm almost done. Hold them off." Ryan gritted his teeth. He was running out of time. A Korthan soldier rushed forward, weapon raised. Ryan spun, slammed his elbow into the soldier's visor, then shot him point blank. Another soldier fired, barely missing Laika. Zira snapped around, fury blazing in her silver eyes, and emptied half a clip into him. Ryan grabbed her wrist. "We have to move." Jace burst from the room, a data drive clutched in his hand. "Ships unlocked. Go." Ryan didn't hesitate. He grabbed Zira's arm, pulled her forward. The four of them ran through the station, dodging crossfire, shoving past panicked smugglers. The docking bay doors loomed ahead. Ryan spotted his ship, engines still warm. But a squad of heavily armed Korthans stood between them and the ramp. Ryan took a deep breath. This was it. The last stand. No more running. They had to fight their way out, or die trying. The docking bay was chaos. Smoke from blaster fire filled the air, alarms wailed, and the cold, metallic scent of ozone from discharged weapons burned Ryan's nose. His ship was just ahead, but the squad of Korthan enforcers stood between them and the ramp, their black armor gleaming under the station's flickering emergency lights. Ryan tightened his grip on his pulse rifle. No more running. Zira shifted beside him, her own weapon held firm despite her injuries. She wasn't shaking anymore. She had the calm, steady look of someone ready to fight to the death. Laika clung to her mother's side, her tiny body trembling but silent, her silver eyes wide with fear. Jace was panting behind them, still clutching his data drive like it was his last paycheck. "You got a plan, Cole." Ryan exhaled. "Yeah." He lifted his rifle, took the first shot. The Korthan squad immediately reacted, their disciplined formation shifting as they raised their weapons. Plasma bolts ripped through the air, narrowly missing Ryan as he dove behind a stack of cargo crates. Zira followed, firing off 2 perfectly placed shots that dropped the first enemy before he could react. Jace let out a nervous laugh as he ducked behind a steel column. Great plan so far. Ryan ignored him. He peeked around the crate, counted 5 more Korthans advancing. Their movements were precise, efficient. They weren't just grunts. These were elite hunters. One of them shouted in a guttural tone, "The woman and the child. Take them alive. Kill the human." Ryan's jaw tightened. Like hell. A grenade rolled across the floor, stopping just inches from their cover. "Move," Ryan shouted, grabbing Zira and Laika as he shoved them sideways. The blast rocked the docking bay, sending crates flying. Ryan landed hard, pain shooting through his ribs, but he didn't stop. He twisted, raised his rifle, and took down another Korthan before he could recover from the explosion. Zira was already back on her feet, her expression deadly calm, as she unloaded a full clip into the next enemy, hitting him with every shot. Laika curled into a ball, hiding her face against her mother's side. Jace, shaking, peeked over his cover. "I really, really hate your plans, Cole." The remaining Korthans advanced, their heavy boots pounding against the metal floor. One of them tossed his rifle aside, drawing an energy blade, its edge glowing a sickly blue. Ryan barely had time to react before the Korthan lunged at him. Ryan blocked with his rifle, the blade slicing through the barrel like paper. He let go just in time, rolling away as the Korthan swung again, missing his throat by inches. He reached for his sidearm, but the Korthan was too fast. The blade came down. Zira fired a shot straight into the Korthan's side, the impact knocking him off balance. Ryan took the opening, grabbed a fallen battalion from the ground, and slammed it against the back of the warrior's helmet. The Korthan staggered, snarling, but Ryan followed up with a brutal kick to the chest, sending the enemy crashing into a fuel canister. Jace whistled. "Remind me to never piss you off." Ryan didn't respond. There was no time. The last 2 Korthans switched tactics, falling back toward the docking bay doors. One of them pulled a communicator from his belt and started speaking rapidly in his language. Ryan's stomach dropped. He's calling for backup. Zira lifted her rifle, eyes flashing. Not for long. She fired a single shot, perfectly placed. The bullet ripped through the communicator and straight into the Korthan's throat. He collapsed, gurgling. The last soldier, realizing he was alone, did something Ryan didn't expect. He turned to Laika. Ryan's blood went cold as the Korthan lunged for the child, moving faster than seemed possible in his armor. Laika screamed. Zira reacted instantly, twisting and throwing herself between her daughter and the enemy. But she was too slow. Ryan wasn't. He charged. The Korthan had just grabbed Laika's wrist when Ryan slammed into him from the side, tackling him with full force. The two crashed onto the metal floor, rolling as the Korthan tried to twist free. Ryan fought like a man possessed, driving punch after punch into the enemy's helmet, cracking the visor. The Korthan tried to push him off, but Ryan didn't let up. He reached for his sidearm, pressed it under the Korthan's chin, and pulled the trigger. The enemy went limp. Ryan staggered back, breathing hard. He turned, heart still hammering, to see Laika huddled against Zira, shaking but unarmed. The mother held her daughter so tightly it looked painful. Ryan swallowed. His hands were still trembling from the fight. Jace, from his hiding spot, muttered, "Holy shit." Ryan exhaled sharply. "We need to move." The docking bay's main doors groaned as they began to open from the outside. More Korthans were coming. Zira stood, shifting Laika in her arms. "We won't make it if we fight again." Ryan looked at his ship, then at Jace. "Override the hangar doors. Seal us in." Jace blinked. "That'll piss off literally everyone in this station." Ryan gave him a deadly glare. Jace sighed. "Fine, fine." He pulled a small device from his belt, typed in a quick command, and suddenly, the docking bay doors slammed shut, the station's security system locking them down. It wouldn't hold forever, but it bought them time. Ryan ran toward the ship, Zira and Jace right behind him. The moment they hit the ramp, Ryan barked, "Strap in." Jace dove into the co-pilot's chair. Zira pulled Laika into the nearest seat, securing her harness while keeping her weapon ready. Ryan slammed into the pilot's seat and fired up the engines. Outside, they could hear the Korthans pounding on the sealed docking doors, their muffled shouts growing more aggressive. Jace glanced at the scanners. Cole. That warship is still out there." Ryan tightened his grip on the controls. Not for long. He punched the thrusters to full power. The ship blasted off the station floor, its engines roaring to life. The force shook the entire docking bay, sending crates and debris flying. Ryan ignored the alarms as he aimed straight for the nearest exit vector. The docking bay's security field flickered as they punched through it, the ship exploding out into open space. The Korthan warship was waiting for them. Ryan didn't hesitate. He jerked the controls, sending the ship into a barrel roll, dodging the first blast of incoming fire. The second shot grazed the shields, but they held, barely. Jace yelled, "Cole, I really hope you have a plan." Ryan's eyes locked onto a nearby asteroid field. A grin tugged at his lips. "Hold on." He punched the acceleration forward, diving straight into the thick of the debris. The Korthans followed. Ryan narrowed his eyes. This wasn't over yet. The ship tore through the asteroid field, weaving between massive chunks of rock that drifted in the cold void. Ryan gritted his teeth, his fingers tight on the controls. His sensors screamed warnings as the Korthan warship loomed behind them, its weapons lighting up space like a burning storm. Plasma rounds sizzled past, missing by meters. Jace, strapped into the co-pilot's seat, was cursing nonstop. "Cole, are you trying to get us killed?" Ryan ignored him, rolling the ship to the side to dodge an incoming missile. "You want to fly?" "Hell no," Jace muttered, gripping his harness tighter. Zira and Laika were secured in the back, but the little girl was crying softly, hiding her face in her mother's arms. Zira ran a soothing hand through her daughter's hair, but her silver eyes were locked on the battle ahead. She wasn't afraid anymore. Ryan scanned the field. If they kept running, the Korthans would box them in. They had to turn the tables. "Jace, can you give me a gravity pulse?" Jace blinked. "You want to use an asteroid slingshot in a live fight?" Ryan nodded. "Unless you have a better idea." Jace exhaled sharply, then started working. "Fine. But if we die, I'm haunting you." Ryan didn't reply. He jerked the controls hard, bringing the ship around one of the larger asteroids. The Korthan fighters followed, but they didn't see what Ryan was doing, reversing thrusters, pulling gravity, building speed. Jace yelled, "Pulse ready. Now." Ryan fired the engines at full burn, using the asteroid's gravity to slingshot them forward at impossible speed. The Korthan fighters tried to follow, but they were too slow. One of them miscalculated and smashed into a floating rock, exploding on impact. The other spun wildly, thrown off course. Ryan didn't wait for them to recover. He pushed the ship to full power, breaking free from the asteroid field. But the warship was still waiting for them. Jace groaned. "They're gonna lock weapons on us the moment we hit open space." Ryan exhaled, fingers tightening on the controls. "Not if we hit them first." Zura's gaze snapped toward him. "We don't have the firepower." Ryan glanced at her, then at Laika, the small girl trembling in her mother's arms. "No," he said, voice low. "But I know who does." His fingers danced over the controls, opening an encrypted channel. Jace's eyes widened. "Oh no. No. No, no. Tell me you are not calling them." Ryan's face remained stone cold. "They owe me a favor." Jace groaned. "This is the worst idea you've ever had." Ryan didn't argue. He sent the message. The Korthan warship charged its main cannon, preparing to fire. The moment they cleared the asteroids, they'd be dead in seconds. The comms crackled. A deep, rumbling voice came through. "Cole." Ryan's lips curled into a smirk. "Took you long enough." The voice chuckled. "You always bring trouble." Then, the space behind them lighted up. A fleet of warships dropped out of hyperspace, their hulls marked with sigils of an independent faction of rebels. One Ryan had fought alongside years ago. And now, they were here to collect a debt. Ryan's comm buzzed again. "You called in your favor. We're here. What do you need?" Ryan's voice was steady, calm, lethal. "Burn the Korthans." The battle erupted instantly. The rebel warships opened fire, their cannons lighting up the void. The Korthan warship, now outnumbered, turned its fire away from Ryan's small vessel and focused on the new threat. Ryan wasted no time. He dove the ship low, slipping beneath the crossfire. "Jace, plot a jump. Now." Jace's fingers flew over the controls, setting coordinates. "We'll be clear in 30 seconds. Ryan spun the ship, dodging a stray blast as the rebel fleet tore through the Korthan forces. Zura watched the battle unfold, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to Ryan. "Why did they help you?" Ryan didn't look at her. "Because once upon a time, I helped them." Laika lifted her small head, staring at him with wide, quiet eyes. The ship shook violently as Jace yelled, "Coordinates locked. Jumping now." Ryan pulled the lever. The stars stretched, and they were gone. Silence. The ship drifted in the calm, empty void of a distant, uncharted system. "Safe." Jace let out a long, shaky breath. "I swear, Cole, every time I work with you, I age 10 years. Ryan smirked slightly, but didn't reply. Zura exhaled softly, shifting Laika in her arms. The girl had finally stopped shaking. She looked up at Ryan, something new in her gaze. Not fear. Trust. Zyra's voice was quiet. "Where do we go now?" Ryan leaned back in his seat, staring out at the endless stretch of stars. "The Korthans won't stop," he said. "They'll keep coming." Zyra's jaw tightened. "Then we fight." Ryan looked at her, really looked. This woman had lost everything. Her people, her home, her future. And yet, she was still standing. Ryan turned toward Laika, the small girl watching him silently, eyes full of unspoken things. For the first time, Ryan realized he wasn't just their rescuer anymore. He was their shield, their protector. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Well," he said, a small grin tugging at his lips, "if we're gonna fight, we're gonna need a bigger ship." Zura smirked for the first time. "And an army." Jace groaned. "Oh, fantastic. Another war." Ryan chuckled. This wasn't over. Not even close. But now, he wasn't alone.